What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. We got a real doozy of a project today. I've got my very first commission. My good friend Kate has asked me to make for her a functional throwing spear. Why? Well, you'll just have to ask her. And before I forget to mention it, Kate is a very talented leather worker, so I'm sure we'll be able to use her talents to make this an excellent piece. So I've got my plan, I've bought all the parts, so let's do this. So this spear is going to need a butt cap, which is basically kind of a spike to come out the end of it there. So I found an inexpensive steel plumb bob. Looks like this. And it's got a conveniently placed hole already, which I can use to pin it into the haft. And the idea is to turn this into this with this. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to trim off some of this steel, I'm going to round off these edges, then I'm going to drill a hole in the end of the staff and insert this into it and pin it through the provided hole. So after a little bit more grinding and filing and some sanding, I get this. I kind of like the faceted look. And its post will fit right into a 5/8 of an inch hole, which I can then drill and pin through this hole in the post. Now this hole is not threaded, but through a lucky circumstance, there's a tiny imperfection inside there, which allows for this bolt to go through and thread on. And this makes my life easier because I prefer to attach it with a bolt rather than a pin, which I would have to peen on either end to attach it to the shaft of the spear. So I guess the fates are on my side. So for the spear shaft, I got this tool handle. I believe it's for a rake. You can find these at almost any hardware store. This one is 5 feet long and has this, it's got a taper on the end. It's about a 3-inch taper, and it's got a diameter of about 1 1/8 of an inch. So the first thing I'm going to do is rough up the surface a little bit. It's got this kind of it's a really smooth, shiny finish on it. So I'm going to rough it up and make it look more like it has been carved out of a tree limb. All I'm going to do is take my trusty Harbor Freight angle grinder and use this flap disc attachment and just kind of lightly gouge the surface with it, give it like a carved look. Then after that I'll just sand off this finish, what's left of it, and after that I can just refinish it however I want. So let's get started. So for the spearhead, I just happen to have this. This is a piece of steel flat bar that's about a 1/4 inch thick. So I drew out my design on the computer and printed it out and made a template. It's going to look like this. The actual spearhead itself is going to be 6 inches long, and all of this rest, this tang, is going to go inside the shaft. Now this steel is what's called mild steel, and it can't be heat treated or hardened, so it won't retain a knife edge, but I don't need it to. All I need is for it to have a sharp point. This is a piercing spear, not a slashing spear. Now there is the risk of the point dulling or bending, but because this steel is so thick, it can really soak up some punishment. Okay, here's where things start to get kind of interesting. Now I have to attach the spearhead to the haft. To do that, I have cut a piece of 3/4 inch steel conduit. This is about 14 inches long. This is going to be the most difficult piece to fabricate, and I'll show you why. You'll notice on the spearhead that I've got basically 3 sections carved out. I've got this thicker piece to a slightly thinner area here, down to this, basically a spike at the end. So what's going to happen is, I want to take this conduit, it's going to thread onto, not thread, but insert onto the thin piece, which is pretty much exactly the inner diameter, and for where the thick piece attaches, I'm going to have to cut slots down the sides, and it will slot in, and then I will bolt it on at a couple different points. And then for the haft, the other end of the conduit is going to go over this taper. It already fits on about 1 inch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut slices down on both axes to create kind of a plus sign. And then I will spread it apart into 4 leaves that will then wrap over the haft to attach the haft to the spearhead using this. I'm going to have to be really precise on these cuts. So wish me luck. So as you can see, I kind of decorated this with the Dremel tool, kind of carved out some bits and drilled holes for the bolts that'll go through the haft. And the next step is I have to kind of crimp this part up here next to the spearhead, this part of the tube. Now I don't want it to crush very much more than that, so what I've done is this little gap here is about the size of an ink pen. So I took a couple of cheap ink pens and shoved them up in there. You can kind of see the tip poking out, leaving about 1 inch there. And I'll just put this in the vise and crush it, and the pens inside should hold the shape. So let's do that. So here it is after I've crimped it in the vise. Looks a little rough, but I will clean this up with the grinder, and for the most part this will be covered with a leather wrap, so I'm not all that worried about how that looks. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to decorate the bottom end of the spear. And before I forget, remember when I said I was going to put a bolt through this butt cap so as to secure it into the haft? But I decided against it. I'm just going to use a bunch of epoxy and glue it in, because this will hold just fine. But as for the decoration, I got a couple of good ideas, and I'm going to use my trusty wood burner to draw some stuff on there. So let's get started. Okay, so I finished up my wood burning. Comes out looking like this. I did this kind of a Celtic knot pattern going around. And I also put some of these marks here, as you can see. And this is a kind of primitive Irish writing called Ogham. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I wrote 4 things on this handle. Let's see, what were they? This one means accuracy. This means luck. I believe this means courage and strength. 4 things you would need when throwing a spear. So after doing that, there's only one thing left to do to this handle. That's put a little bit of a finish on it. I got some natural finish stain. Might give it a little bit of color. And just put it on with this brush. Okay, so I got the metal parts basically finished. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on what's called a forced patina, which is where you soak the metal in vinegar. I got my extra strength vinegar right here. That's a 9% acidity. Normal white vinegar is usually about 5%. I found this extra strength that should work better. And what that'll do is it'll kind of darken and dull the finish, maybe give it kind of a mottled look, and hopefully it'll bring out this leaf etching, make that show up a little bit better. Now I already tested this out on the butt cap, and you can kind of see what it did. It kind of gave it a darker, kind of a, like I said, mottled look. And the main purpose of doing this is to prevent it from rusting, since this spear might actually see some outdoor action. So let's get started. So this is the spear tip with the patina on it. You can see it's a little bit dull, looks a little bit more worn. That's what I wanted. And I did the same thing to the tube section. I think that looks pretty good. And I went ahead and attached the spearhead to the tube. I just used a nut and bolt. I kind of rounded it off here so that with the leather wrap will wrap nice and tight. This dark spot is where some of the coating didn't come off of the tube, but that's going to be covered by leather. So the next step is to attach this whole thing to the wood. So here it is, all put together. And let me just say, this came out real good. These pieces fit together really nicely, nice and tight. And I think it just looks and feels great. And it's nice and straight. And the cap on the end came out really nice. So the next step is I just got to hand it off to Kate, and she will do the leather wrap. I want to wrap it right here, just under the spearhead, and also on the handle at the point of balance. The balance point being where you would hold it when you're going to throw it. So yeah, let's see what she thinks.
This looks so good. That is awesome. Oh my gosh.
So here we are with Kate. So tell us your plan on how to wrap the leather around this spearhead.
Well, I need to give credit to my source. I saw this wrapping off of another YouTube video from The Apprentice. He was wrapping a tomahawk, and so I am using his method. So what I'm basically going to do is I just have some scrap leather lace right here, and I'm going to make a loop at the top of the wrap length is going to be. And then I'm going to tape this with blue painter's tape at the top. And then I'm going to take the leather and start wrapping it around. And then I'll pull through, and that should bring that loose piece all the way down.
Awesome. Let's get started.
All right.
So here's the finished product. What do you think, Kate?
I think it looks really nice. It was a little bit more challenging than I had originally thought, but finally figured something out.
I see you made a sheath for it.
Yeah, a little viewing window to show off your leaf.
Yeah, it looks awesome. Now let's throw it.
All right. We slayed some Amazon boxes. Like and subscribe. It's a hard word to say. Like
know.
and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Subscribe.
I'm using that one.